everybody, welcome. This is such an honor for us. We have the almighty Matt Dillahunty with us, all powerful. Matt, how are you today?
I'm weak and feeble. I'm nowhere near almighty. How are you?
All right. We know you from the ACA. You did a ton of shows on atheist community of
Yep.
Austin, and then you did right now. You're doing hang up shows, right? What is it called?
Yeah, the network that I'm working with now is called The Line, and I do a
The
Wednesday
line,
night
yeah.
show called The Hang Up, and then the Sunday we do the Sunday show. Um,
Right.
so yeah,
Okay. Yeah. So tell us. Let's start from. I know I asked you this question last time, but what motivated you to become an atheist and a public speaker? And then how did ACA? How did you join or start your journey with ACA? Let's begin from there.
yeah. I was a, a standard kind of Southern Baptist Christian kid. I accepted Jesus into my heart at 5 and was active in the church all the way through till I became an adult. And then I spent about 8.5 years in the Navy, and in that time, my beliefs kind of changed a little bit, and I wasn't as active in the church. And so when I got out, I came down to Austin, Texas, and worked in the tech industry. I worked for Dell Computer and some other places as well. And I was just living life. I didn't care about. I was still a believer. I just didn't care about it. And when I lost my job, I thought, okay, God was punishing me because He wanted me to be a preacher. I thought that. My family thought that. Other stuff. Um, and so I set out to kind of get right with God. If God wanted me to do things or be a preacher, I wanted to do it. And I found that the reasons that I thought were good for my beliefs weren't, and that I just didn't understand enough about logic, about fallacies, about propaganda and manipulation, and all of these things. And eventually, I found that I couldn't be a Christian. I couldn't believe the bulk of the Bible. Certainly, there are things in the Bible that are obviously true. There are historical claims and things like that, but the miracle claims and the supernatural elements, there was no way to demonstrate that they were true. And so we were basing our beliefs on um, more of a gut feel, or who was around you, or what you'd been told, or trusting in authorities, and all of these things that were ultimately problematic and not good foundations for belief. And so when I found my way out, I was living here in Austin. I started writing for a couple online um, e-magazines and things like that. And somebody at work was like, "Oh, you should check out this show, The Atheist Experience." They do it at the public access studio every Sunday. And my first reaction was, why do I want to do that? Why do I want to, I've just found my way out of a religious organization. I'm an independent free thinker. I don't need to listen to atheists. I'm already one. I want to talk to the believers. And then somebody's like, no, that's what they do. They take calls and have arguments and discussions with people about whether or not their beliefs justified. And I still didn't pay any attention to it. And eventually I saw a flyer out by the mailbox that Jeff D had put up, because it turned out Jeff D, one of the hosts on the Atheist Experience, lived in the same apartment complex that I did, although he had moved by the time that I found the flyer. That got me to call in. I talked to them. I went to the after show dinner, and the next week I was screening calls and working in production. And eventually, one week somebody didn't show up, and I had a topic, and Ashley Perrion said, "You want to go on and do the show live?" And I did. And then it wasn't long after that I was the regular full-time host and the 2 or 3 time president of the organization, right up until a couple of years ago, when I left and am now working with the Line Network.
All right. So, what is the difference in working with ACA and Line? And first of all, why did you decide to? What led you to choose Line and not ACA? What happened there?
I was already doing content on the Line. So Atheist Community of Austin is a nonprofit educational organization. And so none of us, all those years, the 18 and a half years that I spent there, I was never paid. I never got any money. You know, it's when we're not even allowed to be paid. There are some employees of the organization now, but they're, you know, none of the people who are on the shows. They're people behind the scenes doing production and things like that. And so that was entirely volunteer work. And the Line is a, you know, an actual for-profit channel. And so I started working with Jimmy to do content on the Line to supplement my income, because I got mortgage to pay, I got bills to pay, and
Right.
doing both for a while. But there was an incident that happened on one of the ACA shows that was problematic. Basically, somebody who we had banned from the show, who had threatened to dox my partner, and who was one of the occasional co-hosts. And we had banned them from the show, and they were, I don't know, repeatedly being awful. They got through on a call to a show intentionally, and it caused a behind the scenes argument in a Discord server, and this upset some people, and I was the only one that was in a position to say, okay, we need to take steps to fix this. You have, you know, you've allowed something to happen that shouldn't have, and there's an easy solution, which is just to say, hey, we had an incident on a show. Nothing particularly bad ended up happening out of it, but it was wrong, and we were prioritizing calls or clicks over protecting the trans community or the LGBT community, or, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And you post that apology, and we just get back to business, because it's a big nothing burger. And they didn't want to post an apology. There had already been some falling out between me and the leadership of the organization, because they started implementing policies that I thought were really bad. Basically, you couldn't serve on the board and be in production. And this, I warned them, was going to lead to loads of problems, including, I'm the public face of all this. I'm here in my real name, putting my reputation on the line. And if I don't have a way to have any say in what kind of show we're going to run, how we're going to do things, how the organization runs, then I'm just basically being ridden like a mule by people who don't have any skin in the game. And
absolutely, yes.
I basically said, we need to apologize. They said no. And I said, then I'll quit. And they said, go ahead and quit. And I said, all right. And somebody talked me into staying. They ultimately did write an apology and then put it up on the website without telling anybody, and figured they were done with it. And I'm like, no, all you need to do, it wasn't even that it happened on the Atheist Experience. It happened on one of the smaller shows. Just go on the smaller show and say, hey, here's a link to the apology. You guys can go read it. We're sorry. We're moving on, and be done with it. But they didn't. They were terrified of having more drama, because there'd already been incidents before, that they didn't want to share the apology publicly. And so I had a talk with the leader of the organization. He suggested that we could have an amicable split. And then he refused to talk to me. I literally was standing in the building saying, we need to talk, we need to talk, we need to talk, we need to talk. And he just, he's like, okay, we will. And then he didn't. So I quit. And yeah, I'll never work with him again. And at least until there's a massive change in leadership, because if you do something, you should apologize, and you shouldn't try to hide it.
Exactly. But my understanding was that weren't you the president of ACA at that time, or no?
Not at that time. Well, see, I had been president multiple times. I stepped down from president and let this other person be president, because he had time and interest in doing the job, and I really didn't. I didn't want to be president again the second time, but they had a falling out at the organization, and they specifically said, hey, can you come be president again and try to help us put this back together? And I was like, absolutely. I mean, I was a life member of the organization. I was, this is 18 years of my life, and tons of my own personal money, and action went into this. And after I quit the show, I messaged them, because they locked me out of my emails, and that that's email that
Oh,
I'd had from even before I was doing the show. It was just something that every member got. And I said, I'm a life member. Why don't I have access to my email? So they had a special board meeting and they canceled my life membership too. So
oh,
welcome.
right. So how is it different now that you're doing the live other show? It's called the Line, I think, right?
The Line is the
Or,
network, and the shows that I do Wednesday night, I do a show called The Hang Up, and Sundays I do
uh-huh.
a show called The Sunday Show, which is, it's in the very similar to Atheist Experience. The Sunday show focuses more on religion and things like that. The Wednesday show tends to get more into politics. But the
Okay.
biggest difference is, the biggest difference, I suppose, is that I actually get paid. So I
Yeah,
can buy
yeah.
dinner.
No, but what people think that we're doing this because we make a ton of money, which
Yeah.
and some of because uh, what we are being accused of is that Christians are paying us to talk against Islam because that's the predominant religion in this region, and they're thinking that we're doing this because Christians are paying us.
Oh, nice.
And I time again I always make this clear that Christians don't care whether or not you're a Christian. They don't care if there's a Muslim here or Muslim all around the world. They're not going to pay you to become, talk against Muslims and become
Yeah.
atheists. Nobody gets paid.
I don't know too many Christians that have an interest in turning people into atheists, even if they're Muslims. As a matter of fact, a good chunk of the some of the more serious Muslim apologists that I've seen, they'll be like, "Oh, I'd rather talk to an atheist because the Quran says there is no God but Allah, and the atheist says there is no God, so they're halfway there." It's a great joke, but
Yeah,
it's not.
what a joke.
It's they're
Right.
happy to side with each other. Muslim Christians and Jews will side with each other against a common enemy, and Christians, Jews, and Muslims will side with each other against a common enemy. So it's really silly to think that Christians are paying atheists to go after Muslims. I'd do it for free.
Yep. And this is mostly like you did for like 20 years. You did
Yep.
with public service, educational, and all those shows that you did, and people with you. I saw who was there, Russell, a number of people that I don't remember right now, but Forrest was there. So they were all doing it as a voluntary work. Am I correct? Or some of them were
Everybody
employed?
that you see, everybody that
Yeah.
you see publicly on the show is a volunteer at the atheist community of Austin. That's not the
Mhm.
case necessarily at other places, but yeah, all those years. Well, first of all, for most of those years, nobody got paid, and then we brought in one employee to run the library,
Uh-huh.
and so that was Mark Vanderbrake, who did a great job and ran the library, but also helped kind of improve the YouTube channel and everything else. And then we replaced Mark and brought in a, a great production engineer and an assistant. And so now then there's some management stuff, and then all the freaking lawyers that you need to, I guess,
Yeah,
handle an organization that size. I don't know.
all the legal stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's come to in your doing 20 some years of this show, what is the best argument you've heard, or is there any good argument for God?
It's it's a difficult question because on the one hand, there aren't any that are good enough. There are certainly some that are better than others. I think things like, why is there something rather than nothing, which is more of a question than an argument, really. Things related to kind of first cause arguments. Anytime there's something where there's a big gap in our knowledge and people are trying to use a god to fill in that gap is going to be convincing to some people, and it's certainly going to be, you know, uh, more potentially correct than something that's, false, like, Zeus throws lightning bolts at people. It's when you're looking at the arguments for the existence of God, anything that provides a seemingly possible or plausible explanation. Like, why is there something rather than nothing? Because there's an all-powerful being that created it that way. It feels like it's explains something, even if it doesn't.
Yep. And the prime mover argument, like how did the like these are all argument from ignorance fallacy or some kind of fallacy. Like when they say, if there's no God, then how did this happen, right?
Yeah,
If there's
it is. It is essentially, quite often it's God of the gaps, where we have gaps in our knowledge and people are sticking a God in there. Now, this doesn't tell you whether or not that God exists or whether they're correct. But when we're looking for answers, and you have a potential answer in that, oh, well, there's a God and this is what God wanted. This was God's plan. Um, that is going to be very, very appealing to people. And so I understand that. I also understand the people who are like, I I not only don't know how this works, I feel alone. You know, and I miss my loved ones. And so when people make appeals to there's an afterlife and you're going to potentially see your loved ones again, things like that, I understand why those are appealing. I don't find them particularly convincing, but I find them, I understand why those arguments have weight with people.
right. So before we move on, there are some people who want to ask you some question.
Sure.
So all right. So I see that Albert Hawking. Okay, Hawking is here. Uh, Hawking, go ahead. It's your
Okay,
floor.
okay. Thanks for the amazing show, and thanks Matt Dillahunty to join at our show.
Thank you.
Yeah, I find quite amazing that the same kind of people we had to face, like no matter what region you are belonging to, the religious kind of people, everybody and every religious people accusing us like atheists that we are getting paid from another kind of religion, that they are not belonging. Of course there are Muslims, Hindus, and Christianities in our religion which I belong to, and they always putting the finger they're always putting finger to the Jewish people, that the main opposite religion of Muslims. As a Muslim majority country I belong, they always put their finger that yeah, Jesus are paying you. But the funny thing is, the harsh thing is that sometimes we had to of course every time we had to put our own money to buy the subscription of StreamYard. Sometimes we had to get some charity. Sometimes we had to uh, go through basic plan that we are running out of money, you know. So this is very harsh, and yeah, Mr. Dillahunty just expressing his thought that he's also paid. So congratulations, Mr. Matt. We will be millionaires soon days if
I
you get.
wish.
Yes, I wish.
I
Thank
was
you for
just
joining us. Yeah.
Yeah, it is very much. It is a bit of conspiracy thinking, and it's understandable. In addition to the programs, the lectures and the debates, and the call-in shows, I do other stuff. My partner and I, we keep and breed exotic pets. We have snakes and lizards and things like that. And so this past weekend, we were at a reptile expo, and I came across an amazing deal for something that could have really helped the business, but it was going to cost more money than I had remotely available. And yet there's people commenting who are like, "Oh, Matt's gotten rich off of doing this." And there were people that thought I was just raking in like hundreds of thousands of dollars while I was working for free for the ACA. And my personal YouTube channel, while it's monetized, I've never made a penny off of it, although we're hoping that changes soon. But it is bizarre until you realize this. If you are trying to accomplish a goal, like convert people to Christianity or convert people to Islam, to change the world so that the world is more in alignment with your religion, then every failure, every time you fail, you need an explanation for it. And it is much more appealing to feel like Satan is working against you, or Muslims are working against you, or Christians are working against you, or George Soros is working against you, or the Koch brothers are working against you. It is much more appealing to think that there's a force actively working to impede your progress than it is to think, hang on, maybe I'm not very good at this, or maybe my arguments aren't good, or maybe what I believe isn't real. Maybe there's not a God helping me out. It is just generally more appealing to think, oh, well, obviously these atheists are getting paid by Christians or Muslims or Scientologists or, somebody. It is far more appealing than acknowledging that maybe you don't have good reasons for your beliefs, or maybe your beliefs aren't actually good for making the world a better place.
Yeah, Matt, I used to tell them that if atheism would be a occupation for me, or would be earning source for me, or if somebody could give me some money to do live, to do this kind of show, definitely you will find me 24 hours there to get the Muslims or get the other religion people and wash them and to tickle them in their brain in more hard way. We had to do our own job, we had to earn our own bread and butter, and then we had to find a certain amount of time or very little amount of time to get into this, just for our own satisfactions or to get a better world. Nothing
Yeah.
Yeah,
else.
I think Matt already
Yeah.
Matt said on a last show. He said that once he found out, he thought that it's his duty to let others know
Yeah.
and let others um, bring to the same understanding that what you believe is bullshit.
It
Right?
is.
In
That's a huge chunk of it is this notion that I spent a number of years trying to convince people on occasion that the Christianity I believed in was real and true. And when I found out that it wasn't, I felt an obligation. But also, this is just, I can't explain it. This is who I am. This is what I care about. And I want to believe as many true things as few false things as possible. I want people generally to have an accurate, reasonable understanding of the world, because I'm looking at the world and there are real big problems, and yet we're arguing in Alabama over whether or not an egg is a human, whether or not it counts as a person, and it
Right.
is. What are you going to do? How are you going to address issues of cloning, or do you own your DNA, or any number of things that are big issues coming down the pipe that seem like science fiction now? If
yeah,
you're
yeah,
spending time trying to argue about whether an egg, the instant it becomes fertilized, counts as a
yeah.
human being, put a box of them
Right.
on the seat, driving the carpool lane.
I mean, at what point do they have like when it comes to abortion rights or I know that recently there has been a change in the federal law
Yep.
that and all those things, all the Christians are happy about it. I think they were celebrating that it's a victory in their way, that federal law rules that now you cannot. What exactly the law was, I'm not sure, but
Yeah,
something.
the law protected a right to terminate a pregnancy, and it no longer protects that right, which means now it's up to the individual states to decide what their laws are going to be with regard to abortion access.
Right. Yes. So how do they perceive that as a victory over atheists or for
Well,
their own religion?
yeah, so there's a very particular, I don't know, abortion's a difficult issue because despite the, like, if you're looking at a like biblical Christianity, the Bible is not in any reasonable way opposed to abortion, because the concept of abortion isn't even something that was reasonable to consider when it was written. But what you could take from the Bible is that it doesn't consider children, even born children who are less than 30 days old, to be equivalent to, another person. So when you're doing a census, you wouldn't even count babies until they were, of a certain age, because life's fragile. Somebody's going to die. We're going to count them. There's an old joke that you're a person when you're in my phone book. That's not the reasonable thing to do. But if what happened in the late 70s, early 80s is that a particular group of fundamentalist Christians managed to convince people that the Bible and the correct position was to be opposed to abortion. And this was in response to Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court ruling that permitted a right to privacy that allows abortion access. And so this has been the number one fighting point. And for a lot of people, it was the only issue they voted on, because they were convinced you need to protect the babies. You have to protect the babies, the babies, the babies, the babies, the babies. And that life begins at conception. And so you have to protect all of this. And it's the greatest atrocity, and it's the greatest Holocaust. And it's just absolute nonsense, because we're taking something where there are obviously real potential issues and concerns to think about. It's not just like, oh, we're being willy-nilly, but abortion is the right to terminate a pregnancy. And sometimes that termination results in a delivery. And sometimes that termination results in the end of any possible life that a fetus might have. But once that became the tool from a political standpoint, it's all that mattered. And it doesn't matter that they can point to nothing in the Bible that, is even close to this. If men struggle with each other and in the process they cause a miscarriage, the penalty is different than if you had killed another person. The Bible's an eye for an eye right up until you're talking about a fetus, and then it's a little bit different. And yet they want to pretend it's the same.
Right. So talking about the Bible, is your God, the biblical God, um, benevolent God, or omni forgiving, or the best there can be kind of God according to Bible?
Oh, so the Bible never uses any of the words like omnipotent, omnibenevolent, omniscient, etc. But it does portray those ideas as God is the most powerful being there could ever be. God is whatever knowledge is possible. God has that knowledge, and God is as good. God is good personified, quite frankly. But it doesn't use those omnis. Those things began, and it's why we tend to refer to them as like the God of classical theism, that you get this omnimax God. And early on, it's understandable that there was a rather simplistic view of it. And so people would say, well, if God is all powerful, can he create a rock so big that he can't lift it? Can he create
Right.
a dinner so hot that he can't eat it? And
Yep.
that demonstrates some potential contradictions in a simple version of all powerful. But modern theologians have done a good job of saying, hang on, we're not trying to say that God can do what is logically impossible. So when it comes to how powerful is God all powerful? Yes, God is all powerful in the sense that God can do anything that can be done, but God can't make a square circle, and God can't make a married bachelor, these things that are, directly logically contradictory. And so,
Is he then bound by logic
yes,
himself? Okay.
modern theologians don't tend to claim that God could do what was logically impossible. And so all they're saying is, we don't know how powerful something can be, but nothing can be more powerful than God. That's all they're really saying. And so you can't really argue about it, because it's like saying, we don't know how blue eyes can be, but nobody's eyes are more blue than God's.
But only problem is they can't prove it, right? There's no evidence.
Yeah. And if you found, well, there's no God to look at. So if you found somebody with really blue eyes and you say, I think your eyes are bluer than God's, then they just say, nope, by definition, God's eyes are necessarily more blue. But is blue even something you could be more of? It's not like we know what pure blue or pure red. I mean, these are just labels that we put on parts of a visible spectrum. Similarly, when
Right.
you look at power,
Mhm.
you don't know. We are limited beings. I don't know whether or not it's possible to like there are certain things that are going to happen in the future, which I think I can know. We know about the expansion of the universe and whether or not it's going to suffer heat death. We know that unless something else happens, our sun is going to die out someday. I will be long dead. And so the degree to which we can know the future and with what confidence level is a point of curiosity. But generally speaking, people would think, God knows everything about the future. But there are theologians that will just say, no, God knows everything that can be known. And if it turns out that you can't know the future to a certain extent, then God doesn't know it either. And that's the point at which now you have a potential argument, because you can say, okay, then how can a God engage in prophetic predictions about the future? Could he ever predict anything other than what he's going to do?
Yeah, there are many versions of Christianity or Muslim, or like in our religion, there are at least 73 or 4 types of different Muslims, and they're
Mhm.
all in conflict with each other. They're always fighting, right? And they all claim that they're the only true, whatever they are, is the only true religion there is. How do they solve it, right? How do you know who is right?
That's been
Because
probably
all
one of
they
the
all
biggest problems is, I did a talk about the superiority of secular morality, where I pointed out that secular moral systems, their primary goal is just to get better at understanding how we make the world better. And to do that, we engage in debates and discussions where we point to data in the sense with respect to religions, whether it's Islam, Christianity, etc. If we're trying to um, kind of explain the moral system there, they are top-down pronouncements that don't have any foundation that necessarily applies to or benefits us. It's more of God is this, therefore you should be like this. God says this, therefore you should be like. So you either have divine command theory where something's wrong merely because God says it's wrong, or the model where something's wrong because it's inconsistent with the quality and features of God. But they have no way of demonstrating what the quality and features of God are. And even if they could, it wouldn't demonstrate that that is right, because you might have an immoral God or an imperfect God, and you just claiming that your imperfect God is perfect doesn't make it so, because you're not perfect. So how would you be able to identify perfection?
Yeah, and there's another argument that they bring in, that we don't know how consciousness works,
Right.
and that's why uh, it's sort of, I look at it as a sort of God of the gap fallacy, because just because we cannot explain it doesn't mean that there's a divine anything in there. Have you heard any of these arguments?
Oh yeah.
That our and how
Oh,
do you
oh,
see how?
go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. How do you deal with that?
So I it depends. There's a number of different ways that I've answered things over the years, because I don't want to answer something the same way every time. But sometimes, if there's a right answer, obviously you just want to give the right answer. But when we deal with people who are basically saying, "Oh, we need to believe in God because we need a moral code." Okay, cool. Um, how do you know that that's the right moral code? So one of the best ways to dig in on these things is to hold the burden of proof where it's supposed to be. If you're going to tell me that you have the morally superior model, I don't care if it comes from a god or a holy book, or something you found in the garbage. If it's right, it's right. And if it's better for the world, it's better for the world. And so all you need to do is ask someone, okay, can you demonstrate that what you're saying is better for the world, and better in what way? If you say that, homosexuality is a moral abomination and it's bad for the world, okay, demonstrate how it is. And you'll get some potentially really bad arguments. You'll get, well, two males can't make a baby, so they're not propagating the species. Okay, well, neither can an infertile couple. Are you opposed to them having a loving relationship? Are you opposed to them being married? Fertility isn't the only reason to partner and couple up. You find people that you love and care about. What I'm asking is, can you show why this is bad for society? And quite frankly, most of the time, all you're going to get is, well, I can't demonstrate that it's bad for society. I just feel like it is, or it's not for me. And if it's not for you, that's fine. But we need to teach people that it's okay to say, I don't like that type of movie. I don't like that type of food. I don't like that type of sex. I don't like that I don't want to have kids. That all of these things are fine for the individual. And you can't take what is right for an individual and expand it to, therefore it's right for the entire group. I mean, that is a fallacy, to take properties that are parts of each part and say that they are then properties of the whole. I mean, I'm conscious. My fingernail is not conscious as far as we know. And if you were to claim that it was, that would be fallacious.
Yeah, but the question is, how do we, or how does consciousness work? How does it work? And then,
I don't know.
if right, the answer is we don't know. And if we don't know, doesn't mean that there's any divine anything intervention. Yeah,
it's we have to get people comfortable with the fact that sometimes I don't know is not only the best answer at the moment, but it may be the right answer for a long period of time. There are people who are working on explaining consciousness with different models. There's consciousness as an emergent property. For example, I've used the example before, and it's not original to me, but one molecule of water, is that wet? Because it seems to me that wetness is about water molecules interacting with each other and with other things. And so one molecule of water isn't wet. And so one neuron in my brain isn't conscious or consciousness, but the interaction of those neurons creates a property that emerges from it. And so that's one model that tries to at least describe what consciousness is, even though it doesn't necessarily explain how it works or why it works. I think that personally, consciousness is kind of like a poorly labeled concept. And all we're really looking at is, I'm able to sense things in the world. I am able to make predictions about what's likely to happen next. And my brain is constantly like creating a model of the world. And it's going to be accurate in some ways, and it's going to be inaccurate in other ways. Figuring out where it's inaccurate so that my internal model of the world gets better is why we engage in reasoning and why we care about fallacies. But the awareness that seems to exist there is, it is easier for some people to accept that there's a ghost in the machine, that there's a God who has granted you a magical soul or consciousness, than it is to say brains are complex machines, and the way they do this results in an experience and a perception of reality that we just identify as conscious because we just don't understand it.
Yeah, but these are some arguments that the theists bring in, that you presuppose that you exist, you presuppose that logic works, and they say you cannot prove that you exist, cannot prove that um, science exists. I get this a lot. Can you prove science exists? And I say that science is a It's a
or
method.
sometimes they claim that science is constantly changing. Science
Science
today say
changes.
science like that, tomorrow will science tell like that, and they used to bring that argument of Aristotle or
Oh well, that's philosophy. When
yeah,
you
the
go to like
Copernicus argument that the heliocentric and
heliocentric world, yeah.
geocentric world argument, and they're putting the pointing that the science is changing. We used to tell them that science is not changing, science is updating, like your iOS or Android applications.
Yeah.
When you are updating it, it is not like that a theory is becoming false.
Yeah.
No,
Not
the
like
the
is.
argument is
no such example that a scientific established theory or a peer-reviewed journal theory is becoming a bullshit tomorrow. We will not see that. So
Yeah.
no the argument is that just because science changes, like the let's say our understanding of the natural world has changed. So we used to think that the Earth is flat. Now we know that it's a sphere. So our understanding has changed. That's why science is not reliable. But their holy book has not changed. So for thousands of years, it has remained the same. That's why it's reliable, but science is not. That's the argument they give us.
Yeah. It is
So
very much if you believe that there's a being with a perfect understanding and you're deriving from that, well, then it shouldn't change because it knew everything from the start and it was perfect to
right.
start. But
Yep.
we,
Absolute being, with absolute knowledge. Right.
yeah, we though are imperfect. And so what science and every honest pursuit of knowledge is trying to do is say, okay, I have this package of beliefs, of understandings about the world. And when I get new information that suggests something was wrong about my previous belief, I need to update it. Like, Albert mentioned you could update your iPad or whatever else. But this is a good thing. It's like if you've got your Android device or your Apple device and there's a bug, you want it to be fixed. And you have to realize that when there's an update, it could break this device. It could make it function less accurately. You could put another bug into there. We are going to make mistakes, but the nice thing is that can also be corrected. And so we're in this constant cycle of refining. We are honing an edge on our knowledge. Whereas with religious proclamations, they start with an edge and they stay with the same edge the whole time. It's just the believers think that edge is perfect from the get-go, which we can show it's not. Bats aren't birds. The earth isn't flat. The earth is considerably older than 6,000 to 10,000 years old. It's not a good thing for us to enslave people. It is not a good thing for us as a society to put men and women in different categories with different rights and different roles, denying people their individual freedoms. There are things that we've learned about how the world does work and how the world works better with respect to how we're living our lives that show these ancient religions, while they represent some of the finest thinking of uninformed people of their time, are now outdated, antiquated, and awful.
Yeah. From this, I would like to segue a bit to a lighter topic.
Sure.
This was a little surprise to me that a funny caller, was your ex-wife. This was a surprise to me. I didn't know that until few minutes ago. You told me that. But let's have a listen, and this is really funny.
Sure, yeah.
Eve's back. Are you there, Eve?
I'm here.
I'm very sorry that we accidentally hung up on you.
Okay.
And thank you for being patient. What did you have for us?
How you doing?
So y'all don't believe in God, so y'all don't believe in anything.
No, that's not true.
No.
Well, God's everything, so if you don't believe in Him, then you believe in nothing.
Oh, okay. So you're defining God as everything.
Well, God made everything. Like, how can you walk outside and look at the trees in the sky and be like, there's no God? The Big Bang didn't make the trees.
And can we turn that up a little bit? I'm having a problem hearing it. Okay, so I'm kind of confused because you've said God made everything, and then you've said God is everything, and now you want us to look at trees, and that's evidence of God.
Well, yeah, the Big Bang didn't make the trees. How did the trees get here?
Acorns, seeds.
Well, what about those? And what about before that and before that?
Right, and if you look at the genetic code for life on this planet, the evidence points to the fact that there is sometime way back in our history a common ancestor, that life is this divergent pattern, a self-replicating divergent pattern that is evolved over time through natural selection. That's where the evidence points.
Okay, so all those chemicals just got together and randomly created life. So if we get a whole bunch of chemicals together,
No.
then it's going to create life again, which they've never done.
No, that's not what anybody's actually saying. If your objection is that life can't come from non-life, now you're talking about abiogenesis, which some people do and don't include in evolution. But it wasn't. We're not just talking about simple happenstance. The original creation, formation of life, may have been the rough equivalent of happenstance, but that doesn't mean you can just throw a bunch of chemicals together and get life. But what we can do in a laboratory is demonstrate that it's possible for life, the building blocks of life, amino acids, to come from non-living material. And yes, it's a bunch of chemicals in an atmosphere, apply electricity, you get amino acids. That doesn't tell us exactly how life did form on Earth in the past. But what it does do, it tells us that life can come from non-life.
Okay, well, so you don't see God in anything. You don't see God out in the world. Everything's designed for us. Like the banana's designed for us. It fits in the hand. It fits in your mouth.
It fits in your butt.
No, this at this point.
Nice ending.
So then you end up marrying this caller, right?
I did. So
How did that happen?
okay, that show, there's a reason I was wearing that hat. That was
I wanted to ask you, like, explain why you were
By
wearing
the way, I like your hat, Matt. Is that still with you? Can you put it on your head?
I think I still have that hat. I just don't know where it is right now. It's probably, I have a closet over here where I store all my stuff for magic shows, and I'm pretty sure it's in there.
Just kidding. It was a nice hat.
No, yeah, but first explain why you're wearing a funny hat, and then how you ended up marrying that caller.
Yeah, so that caller, even though they listed her as Eve, that was Beth. And this was an April Fool's show where I wore the hat. April Fool's is a holiday that has to do with the calendar, and it's where people play jokes on each other and stuff like that. So Russell was friends with and actually dating Beth at the time. And they had a conversation, and Russell basically, my understanding is, he said, hey, call into the show on Sunday and pretend to be a Christian, and see if we can fool Matt. See if Matt believes that, you're actually a Christian versus, just a prank caller. And so Beth called in, pretended to be Eve. And if you watch more of the clip, you can see that I did not believe that she was for real. First of all, she let me speak. Normally, if you have somebody that is that misinformed or uninformed, trying to make really sloppy arguments like that, they're not going to let you finish a sentence explaining anything about abiogenesis. And by the way, I may have been subtly wrong about various things there, but at the time, I figured out, that this was not a real call. Eventually, we dated, and then we got married, and we were married for, oh my gosh, seven years, and I don't remember exactly how long, and we're still great friends. I talked to her just the other day. She sent me a message yesterday morning. We are still good friends and talk.
Did she ever come on the show with you? And
oh yeah, no, she was on the show. She's co-hosted. She was in several of my videos. If you go look up like Atheist Debates Christmas video, that's me and Beth just sitting there. Yeah, we were.
Oh, that's Beth. Okay.
Yeah, it lists her as Eve because they were playing a joke, but that's Beth.
Okay, that's cool. And that argument, like the banana fits in your hand, that's Ray Comfort, right?
Yes.
The banana argument, and she kind of brought that in, and you played a real nice joke that it fits in her butt.
Yeah,
That was hilarious.
it's one of the reasons why I was convinced that she wasn't a real theistic caller. Yeah, that thing from Ray Comfort has, I mean, I've gotten loads and loads of mileage out of it. Even when I'm doing my magic show, I start off with that. There's where the video where Ray Comfort is describing the features of the banana. I have the audio from that play as in the background where he's describing a banana, and I start producing multiple bananas out of thin air as Ray Comfort is describing that they have a non-stick surface. That's the opening trick to my magic show. Yeah.
And yeah, and he gives an argument like if there's a product, he shows a soda can, I believe,
Right.
and he says if there's a product, then there's a maker. There has to be a maker who made. If there's a something, if something is made, then there's a maker. If there's a painting,
Yep.
there's a painter. That kind of argument. And
Yes.
So we have heard that a lot of time. And the thing is, we cannot define this earth as being created because it formed by natural laws, the Big Bang, or anything, life on earth or anything else that we see. We cannot we do not have evidence for anybody creating anything. So so that's how, like, when we have heard the same argument that Christians give us, same argument that Muslims give us.
Yes.
There has to be a creator because everything is created. And look at the trees. That's a good, that we hear that a lot. Not only Christians but Muslims. Like they tell us, look at your eyes, look at your hand. That name of Allah is written on your hand. That can you believe that? So
I don't see it, but I've heard about it. But yeah.
So when you hear, like, when you heard about Muslims, how did you feel? Like, have you ever considered that Islam is the right religion, right faith, not Christianity? Because some people, when they leave Christianity, like Dragon here, or Dragon already left, but he left Christianity and he considered other faiths,
Yeah.
and then he said that they're all the same. They thought, then there's no basic difference. So, have you ever considered other faiths could be right, or
Sure.
other religions? Okay.
Sure. And I don't think I definitely don't think they're all the same. It's, because I've had some really wild debate opponents who are awful people. And this applies to, some Muslim debate opponents like Daniel Hakikachu, who's sitting there defending child marriage, and Christian debate opponents like Andrew Wilson, who lies about what he's going to defend in a debate only to come in and try to attack trans people and mock suicide and things like that. But they're not all the same. They are all the same in the sense that they're on the unreasonable side of potential beliefs. And I've debated Christians, I've debated Muslims, I've debated Hindus. There are some similarities in some of the arguments that are presented. The one thing that they have in common is that none of them can present a valid argument supported by independently verifiable, empirical evidence for the claim. Instead, it is, hey, when we look around, we see this, and I'm going to say that God is the best explanation for that. Or we don't understand how this can happen, but God could be the explanation. And I'm getting ready to do a debate here in a month in Florida on the resurrection. And I already know or at least I've been told that my opponent is going to use Bayes' theorem to argue that the resurrection is more probable than not. And so I'm interested in seeing exactly how he accomplishes this, but there are loads of problems with it. And here's the thing for me. Even if you could, you can make almost any case if you're allowed to interpret and if you're allowed to say close is good enough. And that's kind of what Bayes' theorem is doing, is saying, oh, if I don't have enough information to make a proper statistical analysis to tell you whether or not this is likely. So I can only approximate, and I'll try to be fair in my approximations. And if it comes out that my calculations show that there's a 70% likelihood that Jesus resurrected from the dead, then I'll just go with it. But the thing is, if this happened, it would be the most important piece of information any human could know about. If God came down and went through this process that led to the redemption of sin, and whether or not you believed it was the single most important thing you could have a belief about, how bizarre is it that instead of there being independently verifiable, sound evidence that everyone can confirm, that we're going to argue about feeling it in my heart or statistical probability? I don't know how you can show that a resurrection is statistically likely when we have zero evidence of any resurrection like this, where you're dead for a day or so, in the history of the world. How do you
No,
say that that's likely?
like historically, is it even proven that Jesus ever existed? Is there evidence that Jesus was real? All these
I-
stories were.
Yeah, I'm not a mythicist. So I have friends who are mythicists who think that Jesus never existed. And I argue with them frequently because I think they're adopting a position that they can't demonstrate either. I don't know how you can demonstrate that Jesus almost certainly existed or that Jesus almost certainly didn't exist. I don't know how to do that because I don't have a time machine. I don't have any factual, hard, empirical evidence to investigate. All I have are stories. Now, we can look at the way those stories are written and say, okay, stories about King Arthur and stories about Jesus have some features in common where you've got a mythic hero and magical events sort of happening. So maybe they should be in the same category. Or maybe there was someone and we added a bunch of stories around that someone. And so the stories we have about King Arthur or the stories we have about Jesus or the stories we have about whatever figure, those aren't true, but there may have been a person there. But that person is irrelevant because we don't know anything about it. If you made a list of all the things that the Bible claims about Jesus and put check marks next to everyone that we could verify is almost certainly true, and crossed out all the ones that we can't be confident are true, there would be virtually nothing with a check mark next to it. We have no way of confirming any event. And it seems to me that if there is a God who has this plan and comes down and takes human form, and it's the most important thing ever, that God has a duty to make sure that the evidence for that event is stronger than it is for any other event in history. And if it's not, then that God has failed. And it's not my fault for having good standards of evidence if God's not willing to meet good standards of evidence. It's just silly to say, oh, it's like, I have a girlfriend, but you don't know her because she goes to a different school. Well, maybe you do, and maybe she does, but until there's evidence for it, I can't believe it.
Right, and especially when claims about supernatural, like the resurrection and all those things, walking on water, turning water to wine, giving somebody sight, feeding thousands of people with just a couple of bread. And all those supernatural claims cannot be verified. Like you said, we cannot go back and verify if those actually happened. But there might have been a person named Jesus, right? There might have been
Yeah.
someone, and many people would like to believe that there was. So there's a comment here. So this person says history tells us Jesus existed and was crucified. It's 100% real. So
Cool. The problem is, point to any source outside of the Bible that confirms that Jesus was crucified. There are no contemporary sources. There are no sources from that time period outside of the Bible. So the only books that you can point to, the only sources you can point to for Jesus being crucified are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which, by the way, are anonymous books. We don't know who wrote them. Those are names that the church put on them. But even if we knew exactly who wrote them and they claimed to be eyewitnesses, which they're not, that would not confirm that somebody rose from the dead afterwards. It might be sufficient to say, okay, this person was crucified because people were crucified. But how can you be confident that Jesus existed and was crucified? But that's not even the important part. The fact that somebody existed and got killed is unimpressive. How do you demonstrate that Jesus rose from the dead? And I bet that same person is probably frantically getting ready to type that there's an empty tomb. It's 100% real.
right.
No. The fact that there's an empty hole in the ground does not prove that there was a magic man in there before.
Yeah, and talk about magic. I know that a lot of people claim that there are miracles or there are prophecies that were fulfilled. Both Christians and Muslims claim that prophecies being fulfilled, miracles in Quran and miracles in Bible, all those things. And when we examine that, when we examine prophecies, they're vague statements that cannot be. There's no concrete indication of what those prophecies are. And one interesting thing that Prophet Muhammad is mentioned in the Bible that he's going to be the next savior. So your thoughts on
Where's
that?
that? I've read the whole Bible many times. Exactly where does it talk about the Prophet Muhammad?
Right. I tried to read the Bible. It's like I tried reading the Bible, and when it comes to like, I couldn't go past who begotten who. Like, and then I went to the Bible study classes, and I thought, well, I believe whatever the preachers tell me, but I could never. I could, even the Quran. I thought it was full of BS. How can you read that any literature like that? Even doesn't have any value as a literature when trying to read. I don't know if you have if you try to read the Quran
Oh, I have.
and see. Oh, you did, right?
Yeah,
And you try.
I the problem is that I read English translations, and as soon as I get into debates with Muslims or Islamic scholars, they're like, "Oh no, you have to read and understand it in Arabic."
Right.
And I'm like, "Well,
Arabic, yeah,
then I never will." And congratulations.
right. And even the Bible, its translations, because the original is written in Hebrew, I believe, or Aramaic, or whatever ancient language it was, and
Yep,
then translate.
it's
and
in Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. But when I've heard this before. People are like, "Oh, Muhammad is mentioned in the Bible." No, he's not. There is literally no mention of Muhammad in the Bible, and it would be bizarre to find one. That would be a great mention. But what they end up doing is there's a passage near the beginning of Mark where John the Baptist is talking about there's one who comes after me, um, who I'm not even worthy to strap their sandals. And Christians will say that John the Baptist is talking about Jesus, and that seems to be obviously correct because that's what this story is entirely about. It's only a handful of verses before Jesus enters the story and starts, his ministry. But Muslims will say, oh, no, that's referring to Muhammad. Well, how do you know that it's referring to Muhammad? It
Right.
doesn't mention it by name. So you have a holy book that says somebody greater than me is coming. And that same book basically suggests that it's Jesus because the rest of the story is about Jesus. And then, hundreds of years later, Muslims come along and they're like, oh, no, that wasn't about Jesus. That was about Muhammad. It just never mentioned him. How bizarre is that?
Yep. And there's one comment. He says this person, he was about to become a Christian, but he was afraid to leave his religion because in Muslim faith, if you leave your faith, you're going to be killed. So uh, that's one problem.
Yeah.
Freedom of speech, freedom of expression cannot be exercised in Muslim countries. That's one real problem that I bring to every guest that I bring on the show, and I kind of expose this, that how freedom of speech, freedom of expression, free thinking is being hindered, is being sabotaged. So,
Yeah.
I kind of want your thoughts how we can improve that, how we can become more of a critical thinker, improve our situation here in this country.
Well, the issues related to critical thinking and free speech are slightly different, but I'll try and address both of them real quick. First of all, while I technically have a right to free speech in the United States, all that means is that the government can't put me in jail for trash talking Muhammad or Jesus or the government or anything else. It doesn't mean there aren't consequences to speech. Now, what I talk about, I have when I'm not an artist, but when Muslims were saying you're not allowed to draw Muhammad, I drew Muhammad because not you specifically, but an individual Muslim may be prohibited by Islam from drawing Muhammad, but I'm not under the Islamic authority. I'm not a Muslim. I can draw whatever I want. Now, I can also say whatever I want. I've pointed out in the middle of debates. I had a debate with Daniel Hakikachu where I was at. I'm getting ready to do the final review of that here tomorrow. But it was asking him, okay, if I said that the Prophet Muhammad was a child raping monster, what should happen to me under Islamic rule? And he basically acknowledged I could and should be executed after a trial, but executed merely for stating what my opinion and assessment was. Because it is one of the highest rules that you cannot insult the prophet at all. And this in a debate about which one leads to a better world. When your model of a better world is one where Daniel's a tough guy when it comes to women and children, but not when it comes to anybody else. And this power demonstration, which he does near the end of our debate, where he's like, you wouldn't say that to my face. So I got up and walked over to say it to, I'll say it wherever you want. I'm not going to get violent. I'm not going to punch anybody. But I'm not going to stand there and act like I'm timid or scared of him or anybody else, because I'm not. But let's be honest. Would I be able to say and do the things that I say and do if I lived in Bangladesh? No.
No, yes.
Atheist bloggers have been killed on the streets there for saying
Right.
things much less harsh than I have. So it's very difficult to encourage critical thinking, the type of critical examination, if you're not allowing people to express that. Because how can I ever learn what problems there might be with my worldview, with my religious thoughts, with my foundations, if nobody's allowed to question or criticize them? And you have to have that. You have to have, it doesn't mean that we've gone too far in some regards here in the West, where people now just get to dismiss science. They get to dismiss the evidence. They get to dismiss the results of elections. Whatever conspiracy they're led to believe, they think they're on the same reasonable footing as every other belief. And that's simply not true. And we can demonstrate it, but it's very difficult to get people to engage if what you're talking about goes against something they believe incredibly strongly. And so you have to have the freedom to express your ideas, no matter how good or bad or right or wrong they are. And that will allow for critical thinking. The problem with this is it also means that you're going to increase the total amount of wrong answers that are out there. The internet has given us more access to more correct information than ever in the history of the world, but it's also given us more access to more incorrect information.
Right.
Was somebody commenting that I was going to be killed for what I said?
Yes.
Yeah. It's unsurprising. I've been told that. I've been threatened that. And it's one of the reasons when Sam Harris and I were touring a little bit, Sam has a security detail that accompanies him because he's been under direct threats just like Salman Rushdie and others have. And I never knew when Sam and I were together if I was safer because he had security or if I was in more danger because he needed security. I never knew. But I'm in this privileged position of running around the United States and Canada and Australia and places like that and in Europe where Islamic regimes don't have a foothold. And so if they were to come after me, it would absolutely not, it would put them at risk of, violating the local laws as well. Doesn't mean I'm safe.
But do you feel threatened, or do you ever have threats from Christians in your country, in Texas?
No, almost
okay.
never. I won't say never, but almost never. There have been several Christians who threatened to punch me in the face. There are plenty that basically say you will die and burn in hell, things like that. They're like threatening me on behalf of God, but they're not saying. There was one guy who said he was going to come down and shoot me. There was a couple others that were going to punch me in my fat face for Jesus. But we would go, like when I was still with the ACA, we would do the show on Sunday, and then we would go out to dinner, and we would tell people, we're going to be at this restaurant at this time. And if you are an atheist or you're friendly with atheists, come down and join us. You can hang out with us. There are countries where I could not only not do the show, but I definitely couldn't say I'm going to be eating dinner after the show at this place without putting myself in serious jeopardy. And so I'm in a position of great privilege here.
Right. And I remember Aaron was telling us last week, he was on the show, and he was telling us that he was in Middle East in some country, and he and his friend were at this table, and he was talking about 5 reasons why Quran is wrong. And as soon as he said that, his friend grabbed him, and they were out of the restaurant. So they were in the car and gone. So he said, you cannot say that Quran is wrong. So same thing in my country. You cannot say that out in public, or somebody's going to kill you for sure.
And it's wild, because if there is a God, whether it's Yahweh, Allah, whoever, if they're mad at me for what I've said, there's nothing I can do to stop them from killing me. They are welcome to do it, and they can make a big public spectacle about it. But that's not what ever happens. There's never been any demonstration that any God has ever hurt or killed anyone. It's always people killing people because of what they believe. If your God has a problem with me, your God can come talk to me. I don't need to spend any time talking to you about how you think your God is pissed off at me, because I don't care. That's about you, not God, not me. You're just mad because you're mad, not you, but the person who's threatening me is mad not because I've insulted their God, but because they can't show where I'm wrong, and their God won't help them. Their God leaves them floundering about out there with no evidence, no good arguments, and getting walked over by kindergarten level rebuttals to just say, this is a fallacy, this is a fallacy. You need to go, you individuals who believe in a God, instead of getting mad at the atheists or constructing conspiracy theories where the atheists are being paid to do this, you need to go talk to your God and say, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why will you not give me evidence? Why will you not show up and doom the infidels? Why is it that we always have to say, you'll get yours someday? Someday God will fix this. Someday God will change the world. Someday you will be punished. When you're dead, you'll burn forever in hell, and that will be justice. Mwahaha. Well, okay, maybe for all you know, when I'm dead, I get to go to a fantasy land where we sit around and we mock Muhammad and Jesus and everybody.
Right. Okay. So, is there any questions from the panelists here that from our platform? Let's see. There's a train going by. So
It was a nice discussion after all, but sometimes it's not possible to get Matt Dillahunty and this combination every time. He is busy, we are busy, so it will be great to further meet with Matt Dillahunty, of course, in future, and of course we will have a great conversation in future too. And thanks, Matt Dillahunty, for joining us, and hope you're good day and good ahead. Thank you.
My pleasure.
right, we've been. This has been an awesome hour that we spent here, and I respect your time and everybody's time here. And I just
Shatru, I have a simple question to Mr. Matt Dillahunty, please, if you allow me.
Please. Yeah, please.
And first, I would like to welcome Mr. Dillahunty to join us in our live. My question is, in a survey report, I found that most of the organized religious terrorist groups are Muslims. And I think there are many reasons behind it. The most likely reason is that Muslims are the most practicing religious persons than the other religious people, and maybe there are some other reasons too. My question is, what do you think about this situation? Why are the religious terrorist groups, most of them are Muslims?
Yeah, I'll start, but I haven't looked into this, so I don't know if your statistics are correct, but we'll just assume that it is, and we can talk about why that might be. First of all, religions like Christianity, as they gained popularity and as they grew and expanded, committed massive atrocities and were responsible for wars or backing wars, and the Salem witch trials and all kinds of things like that. I think every religion needs to go through kind of a growing and expanding period. Islam is younger than Christianity or Judaism. If you look at the three Abrahamic religions, generally speaking, I will ignore, for the sake of this point, what's currently going on potentially in Gaza, because to whatever extent religion might be involved is dubious. But Jews tend to be more relaxed. They don't proselytize. If you want to become a Jew, you have to jump through some hoops. If you want to become a Christian, it's really easy because they want anybody and everybody they can get. You just say a little prayer, boom, you're joining a church. Whether or not you're a real Christian isn't anything that a Christian can assess. That's all up to God. They've done their work. They just spread the word. Go ye therefore into all the world. That's it. That's the Great Commission. Muslims, on the other hand, have a much more authoritarian structure in most situations. And the practice, as you pointed out, is much more strict. When you have people who are forced to pray multiple times a day, where they have to figure out what direction Mecca is from wherever they are in the world, and face that direction, when you have specific restrictions. Like Christian women, even amongst the most fundamentalist groups, still have vastly more freedoms than Muslim women generally do. When you're required to, not go out in public without a man from your family around, or you're not allowed to drive cars, or you must cover yourself in order to prevent leading men astray. That is one where the blame and onus on sin is put onto the object rather than the subject. And because of that, it's built a structure where the Islamic world was once the pinnacle. I mean, the numbers that I use for mathematics are Arabic numerals. They invented the concept of zero. And then you have a Muslim leader that comes along that says, basically mathematics is forbidden, or we're going to halt our mathematic progress here. And so you have a portion of the world that is the cradle of civilization that should be much more advanced than anybody anywhere else. And what we can see is that that's not what's actually happened. And for better or worse, the freedoms that people want to either espouse as wonderful or critique as, straight from the pit of hell, have allowed prosperity, scientific advancement, and a position where people are more free to be themselves. That, as I was saying before, when you're trying to change the world because your religion demands it, and your progress is being thwarted or halted, or you're going backwards, you're not making progress, you're in decline, then you need to find an explanation for it. It's like if you are trying to woo someone and all of your best efforts, they just don't bear any fruit. There's a number of possibilities. Either your religious beliefs aren't right, either your God doesn't exist, or he doesn't want to help you, or there's some sort of conspiracy working to hold you down. And so it's much, much easier for people to be like, this is, the godless infidels. They're trying to convert the world to some sort of, secular video game paradise full of drugs or whatever, because that allows you to not take the blame for believing something that doesn't have good evidence, for trying to spread an idea that isn't warranted and doesn't produce a better world. It's no longer your fault, it's somebody else's fault. This happens both with the conspiracy theorist thinking, and it happens in authoritarian patriarchal systems like Islam. It's much better to say, we are righteous, we are doing this, and we are being punished for our righteousness. And God will eventually destroy all of his enemies, and we just need to stay strong and make it through. It's very easy to take people who are not happy with their lot in life and say, it's not your fault, somebody else did this to you. In this case, it's jinn or demons or devils or whatever, but it's not your fault. That is an incredibly powerful message to create zealots.
Yeah, in our religion, it's the Lucifer is equivalent to Satan, same thing.
Even every Muslim can sacrifice their own life by the name of God, and they're
And
just
yeah,
laughing at this.
right. All right. So this has been awesome, Matt. Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
time, and we hope to see you again. We'd love to have you back. Come back, and will be such an honor and delight for us. So
Certainly.
once
Thank you so
again, yeah. So this is goodbye from us to Matt and everybody who's been watching, and we'll be back with another guest on our next show. So until then, have a great rest of your day. Bye bye, everybody.